Viper 12, a U.S. Navy MH-60R Seahawk lifted off the flight deck of the destroyer USS Spruance an hour earlier to provide top cover for the southbound task force. The twin-engine chopper cruised at a modest 2,100 feet. Its AN/AIPS-153V maritime search radar sweeping a cobalt sea that looked calm enough to frame on a postcard. Inside, Pilot Lieutenant Jenna Frost Hale and co-pilot Lieutenant Junior Grade Miguel Ortiz bantered about dinner rations, right up until the electronic warfare panel screamed a shrill warning no aviator ever forgets. "Say 6, lock on!" The APR-39C V2 radar warning receiver painted a bright red wedge on the threat scope. An Houthi-controlled SA-6 gainful battery hidden near the fishing village of Houthi had found them. Seconds later, a dusty launch plume erupted on the shoreline. The Soviet-era missile, still lethal at Mach 2.8, had just 23 kilometers to close. At their current altitude, the weapon would be on them in under 18 seconds. First line of defense. Hale slammed the collective, banking the Seahawk into a 70-degree diving turn intended to drag the helo beneath the radar cone that feeds the SA-6's semi-active seeker. Unlike a jet, a helicopter cannot outrun a supersonic missile, but it can slip beneath the beam if the crew reacts fast enough. As the rotor disc bit the thick sea air, Ortiz thumbed the countermeasures panel. Missile warning, 360 degrees, 8 and AR-47 BV2 ultraviolet infrared sensors arranged around the Seahawk's fuselage confirmed the launch with amber lights that stuttered across the glare shield. The aircraft's ALE-47 integrated dispensing system spat a mixed burst, 12 MJU-61 BIR flares and 24 RR-170 chaff cartridges into the ocean dusk. Each white-hot flare blossomed like a miniature sun, while microfilament chaff strips ballooned into a shimmering cloud half a kilometer wide. Why the measures alone weren't enough? Because the SA-6 is semi-active, it rides the reflected energy broadcast by the straight-flush fire control radar ashore. Break that link, and the missile becomes a very fast, very dumb rock. Yet, as Viper 12's dive leveled off at 300 feet, the APR-39 still screamed, meaning the Houthi radar had not lost its track. The flares blinded the missile's IR fuse, but the guidance loop was intact. DIRCM in action. Hale triggered the AN/ALQ-212ATIRCM, a directional infrared countermeasure turret under the tailboom. A pencil-thin laser shot into the evening sky, modulating so quickly that human eyes could never track it. The coated beam dazzled the missile's seeker head, corrupting its final targeting data. 5 heartbeats later, a sonic hammer punched the cockpit windows as the SA-6 overshot by mere yards and detonated safely over water, its fragmentation cone shredding whitecaps instead of rotor blades. Breathing space. But only for a moment. The Seahawk's crew barely had time to reset switches before the AN/AR-47 cried again. 2 more gainfuls streaked in from slightly different azimuths. The helicopter was already too low to dive further, so Hale pulled into a tight, pedal-turning brake. Helicopters can pivot almost within their own length. Fighters cannot. The maneuver forced the SA-6s to chase a moving fulcrum while the ALE-47 dispensed a second salvo of countermeasures. Jamming pod, the ace card. Bolted beneath Viper 12's belly was an AN/ALQ-211 VSIRFC pod, originally designed for Special Operations MH-60s. Ortiz thumbed it to barrage mode. Digital RF memory inside the pod recorded the fire control waveform and then replayed a false copy several microseconds out of phase, fooling the Houthi radar into believing the helicopter had leapt sideways. On the radar screen inside the rebel van, the bright blip they thought was an American helicopter simply vanished. Both missiles, starved of guidance, tumbled into ballistic flight paths and whistled harmlessly into the sea. 44 minutes later, 6:07 p.m. A USAF MQ-9 Reaper, call sign Sentinel-41, loitered 50 miles northeast of Houthi, sneaking peeks at resupply convoys rumbling toward rebel front lines. Its slender wings bore no pilot, but the crew thousands of miles away still felt their pulses quicken when the on-screen Pandora missile warning suite flashed crimson. Another SA-6 had gone airborne. Sentinel-41's avionics had no rotor downdraft to hide in. Its defense was altitude and automation. The ground control station commanded a rapid climb above 15,000 feet, angling the drone so its vulnerable underbelly 30-degree cutout never faced the incoming threat. Simultaneously, the ALE-47 canisters in its tailboom ignited 8 MJU-60B flares and a cascade of chaff that puffed into a 300-square-meter RF mirror. One missile veered, another peppered the starboard wing with 12,000 steel pellets, opening ragged holes but sparing critical fuel lines. Sentinel-41 limped home, shaken but usable. Washington reacts. News of a manned American helicopter dodging 3 surface-to-air missiles electrified the National Security Council. "This isn't harassment," an aide quoted the president as saying. "It's an act of war." Orders rippled westward in encrypted bursts. By 1 a.m. local, USS Spruance received a simple, chilling, fragmentary order. Execute Preempt Delta SM-6. Destroyers usually husband their Standard Missile 6 inventory for theater ballistic or hypersonic threats, not mud-spattered trucks. Yet the SA-6 launcher that fired on Viper 12 was mobile, capable of 34 miles per hour on crude desert roads. If CENTCOM waited hours for a slower Tomahawk, the battery might melt into Yemen's labyrinth of wadis. The SM-6, with its Mach 3.5 sprint speed and networked seeker, was chosen for one brutal reason: speed kills, building the shot. Combat Systems Officer Lieutenant Commander Raj Patel had 26 minutes to craft a flight plan before Spruance slid into the launch basket in the southern Red Sea. Waypoints had to weave the missile through suspected Houthi manpads nests, avoid Saudi air corridors, and enter the target area from an oblique angle that would trick rebel radar crews into scanning the wrong quadrant. At 3:45 a.m., 2 SM-6 Dual 2s erupted from vertical launch cells 25 and 27, their plume lighting the deck like fake noon. For the first 40 miles, the missiles surfed a sea-skimming altitude barely 15 feet above the waves, then pitched upward in a pop-up climb that vectored energy into a shallow, gravity-assisted glide toward Houthi. Impact, 3:51 a.m. Somewhere inland, a rebel radar operator watched his scope bloom with an impossible return. Too fast for a drone, too low for a jet. 6 seconds later, both SM-6s punched through the SA-6 transporter erector's thin armor, their 140-pound blast fragmentation warheads vaporizing 8 crewmen and reducing the launcher to twisted axles. NSA signals traffic confirmed the kill within minutes. Message received. Or was it? Intelligence estimated the Houthis still possessed a dozen SA-6 launchers and stockpiles of Iranian refurbished missiles. To drive the point home, CENTCOM greenlit Operation Vigilant Dusk, a multi-axis hammer blow aimed at missile depots near Sana'a. Carrier Air Wing 17, 6 p.m. Steam hissed from catapults on USS Harry S. Truman as the first 4 FA-18E Super Hornets thundered skyward. Each jet lugged a pair of AGM-154C Joint Standoff Weapons JSOWC, glide bombs with pop-out wings, GPS guidance, and a 130-kilometer reach. The C variant carries a unibody 500-pound broach warhead perfectly suited for hardened bunkers. Over the next 5 hours, 4 strike waves knifed into Yemen's airspace from multiple bearings. Hornet crews punched JSOWCs onto waypoint baskets, then banked homeward before the weapons even began their terminal dives. Above each target, the glide bombs shed nose cones, extended infrared seekers, and bored into earth-bermed storage sites housing Qahr M2 ballistic missiles and additional SA-6 stocks. USS Gravely finished the symphony at 11:40 p.m., lofting 6 Tomahawk Block Fees whose terrain-following profiles snaked along wadis before slamming into already crumbing concrete, ensuring nothing recyclable remained. Battle Damage Assessment. Dawn UAV footage tallied the carnage. 14 Qahr M2 ballistic missiles destroyed, 3 additional SA-6 launchers destroyed, 23 Noor and C-802 anti-ship cruise missiles neutralized, multiple ammunition bunkers collapsed or burning. Houthi propaganda channels fell silent for 18 hours, an unprecedented blackout. Yet analysts cautioned that caches hidden in mountain caves might still exist, and Iranian smuggling dhows would surely try to restock the arsenal. Strategic takeaways. Helicopter vulnerability. The ambush proved that even with layered defenses, a slow-moving rotary wing asset remains tempting prey. Expect Seahawk crews to fly lower and bond tighter to shipboard AEGIS umbrellas from now on. Counter-SAM synergy. Modern survivability depends not on one gadget but on fusion, radar warning, UV sensors, expendables, and DIRCM working in concert. SM-6 surface strike. Debut, Using a $4 million air defense interceptor as a land attack missile is eye-wateringly expensive, yet its speed turned a 200-mile problem into a 6-minute solution. Message sent. Escalation. Latter. By unleashing carrier air power and cruise missiles in the same night, the U.S. signaled that attacks on manned aircraft will be met with disproportionate wrath. Epilogue. Will it be enough? As the smoke settled over ruined bunkers, Viper 12's crew pre-flighted their patched-up Seahawk for yet another dusk patrol. The rebels had lost launchers, crews, and face, but not determination. Somewhere in the Yemeni interior, another radar van warmed its tubes, and another SA-6 waited on wooden blocks. For the Americans at sea, vigilance was the price of breath. Hale's last thought before lifting off was a quiet promise. You missed once. You won't get a second shot. The Red Sea darkened beneath spinning rotors, and another chapter of this shadow war began to write itself in the salt-stung air.